talking to? What are you trying to prove to everyone else? Who is superior? How is your vision clearer than anyone else? Your head's in the sky, in flight, but you will crash and burn. But you will crash it!
Welcome to Agency Land, a podcast about advertising ambition and the lies we tell ourselves to survive both. I'm Jai Smith, and this is your survival guide. Today's guest has spent 30 years in advertising and 15 of them quietly heckling it from a blog. He has been the creative director of JWT in London and Melbourne. He led the in-house creative team that turned MYOB into Australia's most innovative large company. He now runs Stanley with Lee Callister, and to most of the industry, though, he's brand DNA, an incredible blog with over 4,400 posts. This is Stanley Johnson. Welcome to the show, Stan. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you doing? You made me sound...
You have always loomed large
am,
in the Twitterverse. That's where
you.
I first crossed paths with you, and it would have been 2008, I think, maybe our paths first crossed, probably a Twitter meetup. But I think you're one of the OGs with me, probably on since about 2006 on Twitter. Is that correct?
You know what? It's interesting because I was actually pondering this story myself because I was I took a sabbatical year. I was burnt out from agency life, and the day I walked away, got a phone call from RMIT and went in and taught in their degree, which I loved because it helped me get my mojo back. But once I went back into full-time work, so while I was there, I ran a class that was called campaigns. And so what I was trying to do was modernize the way that advertising was taught in the degree, because there's nothing wrong with Bill Bernbach. He's a legend, no doubt. But the course was lacking in awareness of where advertising was at that time. And so rather than sitting there critiquing work and doing stuff like that, what I wanted to do was during that class, I got all of the kids to set up a blog. This is the very, very early days of blogging, so that they could post their work and then they could then leave comments on each other's work. But in order to do that, I figured I should probably start a blog myself just so I knew how to do it all. So I started that blog then. So we're talking 20 years ago or thereabouts. I started the blog, and then due to a few issues that I won't go into, I pulled the pin on my time with RMIT and went back to normal work. And so never got to host the class with the blogs, but kept the blog going. And so through that, I met people like Zach Martin when he was still at school.
Yes.
Like all of those, as we'll call them, enfant terribles, who all were predicting the death of advertising, have now gone on to great careers in advertising and admitted that I was right and they were wrong. But fast forward a couple of years later, I was working with Wonderman here in Melbourne, and I was in Sydney for an award show where we did very nicely at that award show. But the award show was on the Friday night, so we were there from the day before. And I went to Gavin Heaton's very early days of Gavin's Friday breakfast, where I met Julian Cole in person for the first time, and he then introduced me to you. And so that's, and I've never seen you since, but that's how we met.
Yeah.
Right? And then it was around that time there was a big shooting at an Indian hotel, like a terrorist attack in India. And both you and Julia were following that on Twitter. And I'd always resisted Twitter as, it's just bloody people telling you what they're having for lunch and, I'm going for a coffee. But between yourself and Julian, you showed me that it was actually where what was happening in the world was happening in real time. And I'm like, this looks interesting. And so I kind of set it up from my laptop in the hotel that afternoon. And that's much better story.
I remember that now. Yeah, because it was where I do remember that shooting now that you've said it. And Twitter was the first time it had been seen as citizen journalism, and it was different because it was in India. It was different because of the amount of mobile phone coverage. I think video had started to occur slowly, but I think it was mainly picture driven. But yeah, it's definitely a trip to think about, that there was once a class on blogs, which I'm actually convinced there probably still is. But B, yeah,
Well, I know.
so Gavin still runs that meetup. He was episode number 2. So yeah, great memory there. If I take you back even further than our meeting, you started out as what you called a jobbing rider working on Ford, VW, and Suzuki, which is kind of like what I consider like that OG copywriter by trade craft. What does that early grind teach you, and how did it burn you out like that?
Well, I can kind of go back earlier than that. So when I'll tell you how I became a copywriter, and then it would go from there. So my parents moved a lot, and I don't mean houses, I mean countries, continents, and they would move on a regular basis. Over the course of my schooling career, the longest I went to a school was 18 months. So they moved a lot. So we had moved to South Africa. This was in apartheid times, the tail end of apartheid. Wow. And I was 16 at the time and not keen to go to school in South Africa. I was just shy of doing the kind of the O-level exams in England. And so my old man said, well, you should leave school, get yourself a trade, and you'll be set for life. And so I did, probably about the only time I ever listened to my parents, really, which I did do. So they took me to the Apprenticeship Commission, and then they put me through what I think today we would call psych evaluation test, but they had a different name back then. Wow. And when we went back for the let's have a look at the results, they said to my dad, well, Mr. Johnson, the results are fascinating. We've never seen results quite like it, and we honestly don't know what to do with him and so they chose weird trades that they thought were different from the normal. So I won't go into the rest of it, but suffice to say, fast forward several years later, when I'm finished my trade, already left that and moved into a government type role based on that. And then I meet a girl at a party who came to chat to me because she thought I looked like an art director. I didn't even know. I didn't know what an art director was. We didn't have Mad Men on the TV, so I had no real knowledge of advertising. I thought it was a career that people did in sitcoms. I didn't know there were real jobs in it. But this girl, she'd worked at Clemenger's. She was working at Mattingly.
Yeah.
I married her, and she spotted the latent, kind of buried creativity that I never knew I had. So I was I've always been a big music person. So I was quite involved with 3PBS public station here in Melbourne. I was a program coordinator, so I knew my stuff. But yeah, she saw this kind of buried creativity and encouraged it, along with her friend, the late Mary Gradman. And so they pushed me to kind of give it a go. And so I did do. And so in those early days, I was kind of just a jobbing freelancer. I was working full time in a job that gave me the time to do a little bit of work on the side. And I did the bulk of my early advertising writing at a tiny little agency that had commercial real estate. So I used to write commercial real estate ads. And there is nothing like that to master the craft of knocking out headlines. So you'd write 20, 30 headlines and get there. Yeah. And so over time, that made me better at what it was. And then I got an opportunity for a first job with a hot little boutique in Melbourne, which was called Thompson White. And that first week, I was given a brief. Well, I didn't get a brief. It was, we did this ad last year, write us a new one. And that ad was an award winner. And so it's like, okay, I'm looking at this ad. How can I do a better one? And so over the course of that week, me, my A3 pad and my black Pentel pen wrote headlines for 3 days, going backwards and forwards to Pam Kaplan, who's the creative director. Now, try again. Keep going. Now, there's some good ones. Keep going. It was your classic, or to borrow from Don Draper, you could get better. So you just keep trying. So after 3 days, I finally had a headline. I was like, okay, now write the body copy. I then spent the next day writing the 2 paragraphs of body copy, backwards and forwards. Then once that was done, I then spent the final day rewriting the opening line of the copy. On the Monday, they killed the ad. And so that sounds horrendous, but that instilled in me that, you know, you've got to get the more ideas you have, the better chance you've got of having a good one. And so every young person that's ever worked under me or reported into me or looked for me for advice on work, I'm pushing the write 100 headlines, draw all your boxes, write the headlines, just keep going and going and going, because eventually you get all of the shit ones out, and then suddenly, bingo, a good one comes. And so to kind of the work ethic is my number one thing.
And that work ethic, I have quite a few questions, but that work ethic, it's about not accepting good enough, isn't it? It's about understanding that there are probably 1,000 lenses to write one sentence. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I think one of the things that used to really irk me when I went into MYOB, so you can imagine I left 2 weeks before it was announced that Cummins and Partners was for the first time, Australian Agency of the Year, and I went to MYOB. So I left that to go there. But they had a mentality, which is very common in the corporate world, which is that never let, perfection get in the way of done. And so for me, my philosophy is never let good get in the way of great. And so I will always push for that. You know, that's the curse of any kind of, I'm not going to say great creative, but I think any creative who sees their work drive by on a bus or looks at something that they've done on the television and goes, gee, I wish I'd have fixed that bit, or, you know, gee, I wish I'd have turned that a little better, or, you know what, we had a better headline, but we never did it. And so that constantly wanting to do better is there, but it's not perfectionism. It's just about wanting to do great work for the people who are paying you the money to do it.
I love that thinking, and you've even challenged my own thinking, because, you know, since running my own agency, I am guilty of don't let perfection get in the way of done. You know, I switched sides. I betrayed everyone, and now I'm the person looking at the clock, looking at what we're doing, look at the scope. If I just want to go back to one other question, what was it that your now wife saw in you that was the latent creative? And how did she know? What were the things that were popping up?
I think it was the cards and the little gifts and stuff that I used to make for her. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So
that's such a nice expression of creativity, especially if it's not the day job. Because I get the pressure of everyone thinks I've got to write a funny card these days.
And therein lies the curse today, which is I opened that card. Trust me, we've been married for 38 years, so I've bought a lot of presents. I've written a hell of a lot of cards, and I stare at the blank and go, "What am I going to say now?" You know, I've said it all before, but that's like getting a creative brief. You've got to find a way to do it, you know, and so you keep on pushing and pushing. But yeah, she just saw that there. She knew I was involved in PBS, where I used to make a lot of the station promos and things like that as well. So I was doing it. I just didn't realize. I started writing for. Originally, I started writing for street press, doing like gig and album reviews, and I had a radio column. So I was slowly developing that writing thing. But to be honest, when I left school going to South Africa, I was in what would be the Australian equivalent of year 10. So, you know, I have no formal writing qualifications whatsoever.
Yeah. Neither. I don't have any qualification whatsoever, which is interesting. I was going to save this question, but I want to ask it up front because we're talking about the craft of copy, and I know it's probably sparked your interest as well. What do you think large language models and generative AI has done to copy, both to the craft, but to the clients and to the ideas themselves?
I think all I know is that I love... No, I'm going to rephrase that. I've got a AI client that I work with. I've known for several years, and their product, I think, has ethics behind it. It's around about trust. But what I did for them is I repositioned AI as IA for them, which is intelligent, which is an intelligent assistant, rather than an artificial intelligence, an intelligent assistant. And that's how I use it. It's like having the best junior writer or intern, and they cost me no money. Yeah. So before, whenever I started on a project, you know, and I don't write a lot of copy, But and Lee and I do mainly brand development, brand transformation stuff these days, but we do still do some advertising. So I do need headlines from time to time. Whereas before I'd sit there with my pad and I'd start. Now I'll kind of write maybe a handful, like I'll write myself a proposition. I'll get ChatGPT to maybe like churn out a couple of dozen, and then I'll look at them and I'd say 99% of them are fucking rubbish. They're just awful. They're filled with cliches because it's built on everything that's been done before. And the first time I ever got a really good one, I was working on a product and I was reading them. I'm like, oh God, it's like cliche after cliche after cliche. My eyes were getting tired. And so I did this. I took my glasses off. And as I did that, my eyes joined the dots between a word in one up here and then a word down there. And there were these two words that together I would never have had. So the ChatGPT didn't give me that headline, but as Darren Worley taught me, creativity is about spotting connections between two things nobody saw before. And so I saw the connection between those two completely disconnected, disparate words, put them together, and had this amazing, incredibly powerful two-word tagline, which I wouldn't have got if I hadn't have done that. I would never have come up with that, I believe. But AI didn't come up with it either. Yeah. And that's the thing. It could never come up with it. And so now that I've done that, that's probably now out in the ether and it's been kind of swallowed into the system as well. So will it get better over time? Possibly. But it's drawing on the past. And, as we all stand on the shoulders of giants and we borrow from the work of others to build new things, but we do something with it. Whereas I don't think that the language models do that. I think they just connect it all together, but not in a new or unexpected way. It's not 1 + 1 = 3. It's 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah. I published recently on LinkedIn the 10 tropes or the 10 writing styles that LLMs have, just because I was so sick of sequencing them out myself. I just needed to go or give them a handle so I could start getting a rhythm to them. Because I really do subscribe to that idea of it lets you see what boring is. It lets you see what mediocrity is.
That's a lovely phrase. It lets you see what boring is, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to explain to anyone I'm working with at the moment. You mentioned Darren Woolley, and he recommended you into JWT Melbourne on the direct marketing side, but then you ended up as the European Creative Director of JWT London. How did that move happen, and what was your sense of yourself making those changes or those shifts?
Yeah, I think there's a slight disconnect in the info unless you searched it through ChatGPT. When I left JWT, I went to London and eventually became European Creative Director of the integrated part of FCB, not JWT.
Oh, sorry. Yep. So when you moved from Melbourne to London and took on that much bigger role, what was the shift in you internally? Like, how do you go from copywriter to creative director, and how do you see those skills as a sequence, as a difference, as seniority, and how do other people think about making those similar leaps?
Yeah, good question. I am one of those people, and my friend Jill Powell, who was running the program at RMIT, did a PhD on creativity in the workplace, and she went and interviewed all of the great creative directors around the world. This was pre-Zoom, so it was probably the junket of a lifetime, including the likes of people like Trevor Beatty, and they all said pretty much the same thing, which was my philosophy, which is I'm waiting to be found out. I'm waiting for one day someone to tap me on the shoulder and go, you know what, you're maybe not as good as we thought you were. And we all have that innate kind of like nervousness. And it's important because the day that you think you're great is the day that you're actually not as good. So having that sense of doubt is always important, I think. And so I was in our little group at JWT. There was a smallish group. And we had been inspired by the arrival of David Nobe into Melbourne, who took a small little sleepy direct marketing shop and turned it into this award-winning powerhouse. And so what Nobe gave us was the freedom to do direct marketing differently. So this was in the golden age of the Campaign Palace. Our philosophy, myself and the people I worked with, was we wanted to create the Campaign Palace of direct marketing. And so we wanted to do that sort of work. And so we were winning awards. We were doing truly great work that unlike any other kind of envelope and stamp type work you'd seen. And then one day our creative director resigns, and my art director had been told by the head of strategy that rather than allowing them to appoint someone, that she and I should pitch ourselves to take on the creative directorship. She had that confidence, I didn't, because I'd been at JWT for a bit over 2 years, and that's my first full-time job. Nobody becomes a creative director in 2 years. The difference was I was a mature entry because I'd had two jobs previously, so I came late. So the executive creative director, Michelle Lawrence, didn't know my background. He didn't employ me, but he saw the work that I did, the way that I led the team, the way that younger people in the rest of the department looked up to me. So he came knocking on my door and wanted a quiet word, where he offered me the job on my own. And I said to him, look, I'm not ready. There's no way I would see myself as a creative director. I'm still mastering the craft of being a copywriter. And he said, well, my job is spotting talent, and you've got the talent and you're ready. And so that was a tricky thing to deal with my art director suddenly being her boss. But, we're still friends all these years later. But he saw it in me. And so my concern was, if I became the creative director, I didn't want to be the shit manager like the ones that I'd worked for, because I'd worked for two creative directors there, and both of them were terrible managers. And so he agreed to send me on this 1 week management training course to learn how to be a manager. And I then became a creative director. And it was that management training course taught me a lot. It taught me the importance of relationships and trust, which is what all great work is built on. You come into this business thinking we're all about the ideas. I just want to do amazing ideas. I want to do great work. You can't do it unless you build relationships of trusts with your people, with the suits, with the clients. You've got to build those relationships with all of them. And then, I hate the idea of risky work. It's not risky if people trust you. So you build the trust, and then it's not about risk. It's about, I feel a little bit nervous about that, but I trust Stan, so I think we'll be all right.
Yeah, it's that line between excitement and discomfort, right? And I think there's a great Japanese term for it, which has left me mushiburi. That idea of excitement and nervousness before a tremendous task. I really like that sense of, I've been guilty of it as well, that creative directors own the idea, but you're 100% correct. They've got to be people leaders. They've got to be able to understand trust. Otherwise, the work has nowhere to breathe. And I don't think it's about being the best copywriter in the room or the best art director in the room. It's about steering or stewarding that team, that collaboration into an idea space. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think someone described it to me once as the job of a copywriter is you're the guy who's on the bench in a football game where we're 2-0 down. And so we send you on, and you're going to go in and you're going to kick the goal that's going to save the day. And so if the teams can't crack the idea, that's your problem. And so you've got to be good enough creatively to be able to do that. But at the same time, you've got to be able to not put your opinions onto the people that work for you. You can't make the work like you want it to be. You've got to allow it to flourish and encourage. So that's, I think, the way it should work. But a few years ago, I was in New Zealand. So I landed, I think it was Wellington. I landed at the Wellington airport, myself and my offsider were going to make some content films. And the guy looked in my passport and he goes, "Ooh, creative director. What do you do?" And it was so bizarre, I've got to be honest, Jarra, because no one had ever asked me that question before. Even my mum and dad, who still to this day have no idea what I do. But he asked me this question, and so I had to, and I'm thinking, oh shit, I better answer it, otherwise he won't let me in. So I had a little pause, and I kind of said, you know what? My job is to help make ideas happen. And he said, well, I still don't know what you do, but it sure as hell sounds like fun. Stamp the passport, and off I went. But I really liked that as an idea because it's helping to make ideas happen, whether that's kind of lunching with the client and talking about stuff to build that trust and stuff like that. Whether it's encouraging kids to kind of go back and try again when it's kind of log jammed somewhere, and you've got to go in like Henry Kissinger and kind of negotiate your way out of that. Like helping to make ideas happen, not your own ideas, but just the idea, full stop, is the creative director's job, I believe.
Love that. I think that's a really, really important difference between understanding the craft versus the role. And I think that's a thing that agencies in particular get confused by. It's like a lot of people have job titles, but what's the role of that job within the agency and that person within the agency? And I think having a really clear delineation between those things is a really powerful thing.
It used to be that becoming the creative director was the pinnacle in your career. Creative director as a title makes sense to me. Then suddenly we introduced the executive creative director. Well, I get that. That's a person who sits further up, who probably rarely dabbles in the day-to-day and is more an executive than a creative director. But now we have a chief creative officer, and I'm sure eventually we'll have another title above that. And so when you're a chief creative officer, you're not really directing the creative. I don't, like, that's just my opinion, as in like the titles. I don't like all of these military influence titles. So I have a real personal thing with them, But to me, the idea of helping make ideas happen is what a creative director does. And that's why I think that's the perfect job title.
Yeah, I think it's the... I love it, and I love that idea of the help. It's not every idea, it's about letting ideas happen as well. Yeah, I agree with you. I think the inflation of titles to everyone wants to be C-level, and like in most organizations, it's absolute bullshit. Like unless you've truly got a seat at that table with a P&L and you're directly influencing it, and you're not just looking after the marketing line because there's a true CEO or an ops manager looking down down saying, well, thanks for your input, but we'll take it from here. They are a bit frivolous, and an old mentor of mine, Tim Sutton, used to say job titles are like currency, and if you give them all away, then it devalues that currency and then they become meaningless, and then what's the point anyway? And that was from an organization where I think I left with the title of senior vice president, and like you can't say it to somebody with a straight face unless they know what industry you're from.
Yeah, I guess we could call it the Americanization of corporate life. I think I like the title of creative catalyst is kind of what is what we do, which is about inspiring. Yeah, I kind of took that from Brian Eno and the way that he works. Yeah, he always says he's a non-musician. Yeah. And his role in the studio, is to kind of like throw out random stuff. Yeah. So he's the model that I've kind of used in my career.
What do you think of a Rick Rubin then? I know Brian Eno's a little more respected than sometimes a Rick Rubin, but do you think Rick Rubin has any value in the studio, the M&M producer?
I think Rick Rubin, like Brian Eno, he says he's not a musician. But I think the difference is that Brian Eno seems to make an awful lot of music, so maybe he is.
Yeah.
But he calls himself a non-musician. So in the same way as both you and I said about 15 minutes ago that we don't have the qualifications to do what we do, he wears that proudly. But he works around it. Whereas, again, the sort of thing that Rick Rubin brings is I often kind of borrow from that, but unknowingly. But my thing is, I like to say that I often quote the great Australian philosopher Dennis Denudio from The Castle, which is it's all about the vibe. And as silly as that sounds, it's a great icebreaker with clients because it's like, oh yeah, I get that now, I understand. It kind of it's a nice way of describing it.
Yeah. Who's beyond that particular philosopher, who's been some of the biggest mentors to you, and what's some of the lessons that they've shared with you and that you share with others?
I've got to be honest, do I have mentors? I don't know if I do. I think that I always, I've mentored a lot of people. You can find my little bit of DNA in like all across everywhere. Because I'm very good with younger people. And I think the reason for that is because when I came into the business, I was already older, but I worked with younger people. So it's always been natural for me to kind of hang around with the kids. I think Esther Clarahan described me as possibly the only person she'd met who networked with the bottom rather than the top of the industry. And, like that's my late friend Nick Sawyer said, I always like look after the kids because I know one day I'm going to be old and I'm going to need a job. And so those kids will one day become creative directors. So hopefully they'll stand me in
Yeah.
good stead. So I'm still friendly with several of the kids I taught at RMIT. I went to weddings of those people. I've employed them. I've made ads with them.
Oh, wow.
Because I have relationships, but also I know talent
Yeah.
when I see it.
What do most agencies get wrong about nurturing talent? Where are there big blind spots?
I haven't worked in most agencies, so I couldn't say. It would be the delicate answer to that. But what I would say is in 2026 is very different to when I was at JWT, which was in the 1990s. They had a focus on training. There was opportunity to train on multiple things.
Okay.
And they encouraged it so much that you would they gamified it. And so you would earn points if you did this course or you did this course or you went and did this 3-day thing. And so once you built up, I think it was 10 or 12 points, you got $1,000 US check for doing training. That's the commitment to training. So we used to describe, and people still do, J. Walter Thompson as the University of Advertising. And then the line that would come in after from everyone that worked there was, you do your training and then you leave and get a real job where they pay you real money somewhere else, which is basically what I did. But it was the University of Advertising.
Yeah.
Today, I don't see that at all. And I've watched in the agencies that I've been in and around, I've watched the way that senior people don't have enough time for juniors. It's very much a sink or swim kind of experience. I've seen people being shat on and belittled, which I find abhorrent. There's just no need for it, really. It's like, I think a lot of it is advertising is full of people. Because it's a young person's business, it's full of people that don't have any kids, and so they don't know how to deal with kids.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I think that's a really, really interesting insight. You mentioned before you burned out. What led up to that, and how do you manage it, or what's your suggestion to people you mentor on how to manage that?
What led to it? My number one rule today is Lee and I have a rule, which is we work with people we like and brands we respect. We didn't do that back then. You work with arseholes, you get shat on. And there's something really bad about that. So that's what led up to it. You end up second guessing your work, second guessing your ability. It's really not healthy at all. It's really not. And I've seen it happen to other people as well. They're so focused on stuff that needs to be done and the pressures that come with it. And so you make stupid mistakes, or you make, you're kind of constantly questioning yourself. So that's what happened to me. I just fell out of love with the business. And going to RMIT, we then worked with young people who, a lot of them had terrible ideas, but it was all about the idea. And so there were no clients involved. It was pure ideas. And that's when I realized that it was the ideas that I loved, not the business.
Yeah.
Even though I do.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a choice, and I think it's a really bold one to accept that, and to take, to leave the money on the table as it was. There have been a couple of times running DOUBLESTAR where we've got eyes open, we're doing this for the cash, and it's probably been some of the worst decisions we've ever made. And we regret it. The team hates us for it. And we get to the end and go, was that worth it? Well, we've got some more money in the bank, but I don't think anyone's any happier. I don't think we're going to show anyone the work, because nobody wants to think about that experience anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. Lee and I worked on a thing last year where we were, I'm not going to name them, even though I should name them, shame them, to be honest, but we were introduced by a client that we'd worked with before who had invested in this new product, and they wanted us to be overseeing it, doing the creative on it. And in the first meeting, when we met with the people, there were just a couple of questions that seemed a little bit off or a little bit wrong.
Yeah.
But we thought, well, these guys who brought us in, we're close to these guys. We're good to go. And that turned out to be the worst client we have collectively together over the years ever worked with. They were absolute. I'm not, I try not to swear, but I bring out the C word for the collective of those people. Yeah. They did not pay their bills. They did not communicate. They were absolutely awful. And it was interesting. Lee and I were just, yesterday, we're just about to kickstart a big new project. But before we do that, we sit and talk shit for 10 minutes about football and stuff like that. And I'd noticed that one of the people who brought us in on the project had actually tweeted over the weekend a piece, one of the concepts that we presented originally to the client.
Really?
And I sent it to Lee and said, isn't it funny that this concept, which the client loved and signed off, and then 2 days later changed their mind on, and then it all went downhill from there. But now they're kind of putting it out there as kind of like the promoting the work. And that's how we kind of came to the conclusion in that brief chat around we both spotted that there could be a problem here, but we don't like the term red flag. So we just kind of pushed it to one side and compartmentalized it and carried on. But we should have recognized it. So, we broke our golden rule. We worked with people that we thought we liked, but it turns out that we no longer do.
Yeah, incredible. If we leave agency land for a second, when you went to MYOB, that was a lot more than just an internal agency, wasn't it? It was kind of like a creative director for the business overall. Is that true? And how did that come about?
Yeah, that was in essence, yes. So I was working with Cummins and Partners, where I had I almost operated like a locum crowd director. I just kind of would float in and help on projects and things like that. But I got a call from a headhunter out of the blue who said that he knew my background working with tech brands and tech and the stuff I'd done at RMIT, where I'd introduced digital and things like that into the degree. And so he had this role with a large Australian tech company, and he could think of only 2 people that he could recommend, and I was one of them. And so I asked him what it was, and he wouldn't tell me unless I expressed an interest in it. And so we had a chat for 5 minutes. I said, look, I'll have a think about it overnight and I'll come back to you tomorrow. And so I was working, I used to sit next to it many times, Zach Martin. He was with us at Cummins there. Yeah, so I sat and told Zach that story. And he and I spent an afternoon trying to work out who we thought it would be. And so in the end, we couldn't work it out. So he said, just fucking lying. Just tell him, you're interested, and then you can find out who it is. And so I rang him back and told him, okay, I'm interested. Tell me more. And then he said it was MYOB, and my bloody jaw hit the floor, because I didn't see them as, this hotshot Australian tech company. But if you think about it, they were one of Australia's original startups. They were a digital company that put software in a box that did the work that humans had to do before. But their problem was that they'd fallen on hard times with the arrival of Xero, who did what MYOB did in the beginning, but he went on the internet and did it. And it was quite simple. And so they were looking to transform the company, and that they felt they needed someone to help drive that from the inside. I think the person who put the job out there had gone to the CEO, and so the CEO said, okay, if this is going to help you achieve what you want to do, then this will help us achieve what we want to do. And so that was that. And so he said, look, go for an interview with the people and then make your mind up from there. He said, you go out there, you walk in that office. He said, I'm telling you now, it's like going to Facebook.
Yeah.
This is probably before Facebook was purely on the nose, but he said it's just a modern, thriving tech business. So okay, fine. So their office at that stage was in a floor that sat above a suburban shopping centre. So a strange place, but I've always loved weird places. I would never want to work for a droger or someone like that, because I don't think I'm good enough. So I always like to fly just below the radar. So this shopping centre thing was right up my alley. I wander through the shopping centre, there's David Jones, there's Katie's, there's a Rebel Sport, and there's a lift, and I press the lift and I go up 2 flights of stairs, the door opened, and it was like I'd landed at Facebook. It was just it was an astonishing building. And it was enormous. It was the largest single floor office space in the whole of Melbourne, sitting across the top of this shopping centre. And I wandered around and met the people. I'm like, okay, I'm interested. This is cool. And then they described their vision and what they were looking for and how they thought someone like me could help them.
Wow.
There were, I think, 5 interviews in the end, psych tests, all sorts of crapola to finally get it. And then I was offered the job. But by that stage, it had taken so long, I wasn't actually sure if I wanted it anymore because they came knocking on my door and suddenly I had to prove that I was right for them. And so I confided in someone at Cummins, who then, one of the partners, who then suddenly they came back with a competitive offer. And I'm like, oh, you know what? Maybe I'll stay here after all because I love it here. This place is cool. I'm hanging out with Zach every day, like my young, kind of rebel protege, working with great creative people. Sean Cummins was so inspirational to kind of work with. But my wife said, you now sit at a crossroads. Again, she got me in. She pointed me into the business. Now she pointed me in the direction here. She said, you've got 2 things to choose from. You've got the agency that you love with people you love and who love you, and they've offered you good money. Or you've got something you've never done before and that someone has never done in a truly unique way. And so it's a chance to kind of go out there, break new ground and make a new name for yourself. The difference as well is that in agencies, sooner or later you'll either be too old or too expensive, so they'll push you out. That will never happen in a corporate. And so I'm like, yeah, okay, well, she said that, but in actual fact it kind of did, but that's a different story. And so I took that chance. But knowing that, I knew that when I went in there, I couldn't go back. Once you leave agency world and you go become a corporate person, well, like you're a bit of a has-been. This was before internal agencies became a real thing. And so I had to prove myself. When I did the interviews, the final interview of them all was Caroline, who was the person who was the hiring person, said that Tim, the CEO, wants to meet you because he's signing off on this job. And so he wants to make sure that you're the right kind of person. I'm like, that's cool. So they've set up the meeting and I go out there. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, whatever. And I get a text in the morning in the car on the way out. Tim wants to know, he's going to get some coffees. How do you want yours? And so I turn up for the meeting to meet a CEO. Now, this is not like a little startup CEO. This is a guy in charge of 1,500 people with multiple offices. A real CEO. I ain't never met one of those before. And so he turns up and he's got the 2 coffees and he puts them down and says, hey, Stan, I'm Tim, blah, blah, blah. And we just sit and talk. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting.
A real CEO. I was about to say the same thing.
He kicks back in his chair and he says, okay, I've got one question. He said, I've looked at your CV. I've been through your LinkedIn. Why the hell would someone like you want to come and work for someone like us?
Yeah.
What a question. What a question. I said to him, I'll tell you why, Tim. I said, because I'm English, grew up a lot in South Africa, and I came to Australia, and then I went to London, and then when I came back, I realised that I was Australian, but never noticed. I became Aussie by osmosis, Aussiemosis, as we'll call it. And so I made it my mission. I've always loved great Australian brands. So I've worked on the final Ford Falcon launch. I've worked on Vegemite. I've worked on Australian beers. Yeah, and so I see MYOB as a great Australian success story. But I don't see it as a great Australian brand, and I think it should be. And so I'm coming in here, and my personal mission is to take it from a great Australian success to a great Australian brand. And he said, welcome aboard. And then I said, okay, now I'm going to ask I'm going to ask you a question. He goes, yeah. I said, why do most people work here? Based on what I've just said, why most people work here? And he said, Stan, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you. He said, in our most recent staff engagement survey, something like 70% of people to that question, what it is they love about moving in, it was convenient or close to home. I'm like, are you serious? I'm like, okay, you're almost talking me out of the job now, because let me tell you, if an opportunity came up in Sydney, I would go up to Sydney for the week and come home on the weekends, because I'm looking for the chance to do amazing things. That's all I live for.
Gosh.
The fact that it's next door
God.
is not a reason to choose it. And he goes, I know. And that's why we need people like you to come into this business. And so when I arrived there from day one, I had the seal of approval of the CEO to go in and do what I wanted to do. And so I walked in there basically like I owned the joint. I've never done that before. I walked in there and did stuff which I've never done before. I'm rambling now.
Was it? No, you're absolutely not. Was that confidence in yourself, or was that confidence from a structure and a CEO that believed in you? Because you even the way you spoke about it then is fascinating. Like it felt like that was almost this career in agency land from a job you really loved. You know, I found quotes about you saying how comfy it was and those sorts of things, and it was great to hear them back. But it seemed to me like you went from craftsperson to almost a creative leader in a whole new, like you're a creative leader at Cummins and other agencies, but it seems like that your remit suddenly became bigger of what you were leading in a sense, almost more of a culture anchor.
Yeah, it's exactly right. I've worked a lot with the people from the org dev team, as they call them. You know, help kind of work with them a lot. And one of the things I learned from them was that culture is so important. And I never knew about this sort of stuff. You know, we all think of culture in agencies as, we've got a pool table, tennis table, we've got like a fridge full of free beer. We're all here on Friday night, pizza, whatever. But what you learn when you hang around with people who specialize in this stuff is that in actual fact, culture comes from the top down. It was that, we all think of culture as, like the people in the agency make the culture. In fact, it should come from the top down. So working late, having pizzas and beers, that's not culture. That's people who's worked for a business that is unable to get work done in a 9-to-5 environment. Yes, we all want to work a few extra hours, but when it's a regular thing, there's something not right there. And so learning that culture comes from the top down is one of the things.
Yeah. And I think it's this false humbleness that CEOs and senior leadership say it's not. And I think it's also a dismissal or a dismissiveness of their own role in setting culture. And it really irks me to think that they ignore or pretend to ignore those power dynamics, because they do set the culture. They set the standards. They have authority where, as you and I know, by, as you said it, like, hanging out with the kids, networking with the kids, that's how you get influence. And understanding those different dynamics is really important. And I think it's totally misunderstood and misvalued in the way and the role the leader has, because it's this false, it doesn't come from me, it's about what everyone else will. Like, bullshit. It's not. It's up to you. So take responsibility and take it very seriously.
Yeah. And I think the thing for me, as I said, is that, coming in with the CEO's kind of permission, I think is the best word for it. It did allow me to kind of push a little bit harder. So I needed to kind of make a mark there. What I didn't want to become was just this guy who sat in the internal agency making emails better. There was so much scope to do things that weren't there before. And so I remember at the end of my first year, we were all kind of finishing up for Christmas holidays. I went over to the lady who was responsible for bringing me in, and we're still good friends now. But I went over to her and I said, Carolyn, I just want to thank you for, I think, the best year of work I've had in a very, very long time. I think I think she was a little taken aback, and the reason was because within agencies and all those sort of kind of companies, you basically work for clients and you're working on briefs. So here's what we want you to do. And, we always come up with a few extra things or whatever. But in this role, it was, look, I've got an idea. I feel like we should do this. Or, you know what, we've got an event coming up here. Yeah. God, how about doing a T-shirt with this written on it? Or how about we did this? And so we're constantly kind of feeding the machine with ideas, which was how the influence spread. So much so that after 18 months, I had an unofficial title of head of T-shirts. Because to me, modern tech companies, have T-shirts with stuff written on them. And so I produced tons of T-shirts.
Yep. You're speaking my language. Our favorite thing is every year we have a new one print order of T-shirts, and people, our clients and my friends, try and buy them off me because they're so fucking cool. And I don't design them, but the team design them. We've got our first ever white T-shirt because obviously we're a fairly black T-shirt place. It's coming out and a matching cap. And again, I'm like, if you can't make merch that your team want to wear on the weekends, then you're doing it wrong. It's such a great opportunity. I don't know, I'm just obsessed with T-shirts. So I hear you.
Yeah, I know. But the other thing as well. So one of the early things we did when I got there, MYOB was still making product in a box to sell through JB Hi-Fi and stuff like that. I think that's long gone now, but they were still doing that. So I did that. So that packaging needed to be redesigned rather than get the internal people to do it. I outsourced that to an old art director friend of mine who recently returned from New York, and he and I worked on that together. And so we did the packaging. And so someone asked, why is the creative director sitting there writing the copy to put on a box? Shouldn't they be doing bigger picture stuff? And I said, well, I'll tell you why I'm doing that. Because every one of these boxes, when it sits on a shelf, is an advertisement for our product. People don't see it that way. But on the shelf, when you're walking through, this thing wants to wave at you and say, hello, have you noticed me? Pick me up. I'm interesting. Let me tell you about myself. And so that's why I kind of put that focus on it. And then from there, that then led to what's the best advertising of all? Merch. So get people, give them T-shirts, and they wandering the halls of the shopping centre. They're going down to the pub on a Friday, and they're taking our brand out and modernizing it before people's eyes. That's the key. Yeah, that's the way I saw that.
I think it's just such a beautiful marker of where a business is. It's just, it's something I just find a real treat. Last question, because I've got to ask it. The Brand DNA blog was prolific, to say the least. And I'll read the quote back to you that I really found really, really moving, to be honest. It was, after 4,400 posts, I'm closing down Brand DNA. It has been fun. Actually, it's been awesome, but I think blogging and I are over for now. The agency relationship has gone from partners to service providers, which I think is a bit of a shame. It should be very much working together. We are currently experiencing a pandemic of creative mediocrity. That's a huge leaving sentiment. It's really powerful. What made you shut it down then, and how do you reflect back on it now?
I think at the time, which was during COVID. Yeah, and so there were a number of things that happened. And so, my time at MYOB had come to an end. Lee and I had reconnected and just gotten, our fledgling little macro consultancy up and running, and we landed this huge opportunity with Australia Post. My wife and I had sold our house in Brighton to fund the build of a beautiful house down on the Mornington Peninsula on a steep hill. COVID comes along, suddenly we're all trapped. The builder of our house goes into receivership, and we lost several $100,000, which we have still not quite recovered from. And Australia Post shut down that project. I was also sitting on the board of a not-for-profit in Sydney, and that weighed heavily on me as well. So I pulled out of that. So all of those things were just too much. So whereas 10 years earlier I'd had that burnout and I walked away, here it wasn't a burnout. It was that life was hitting me over the head with multiple things. And so I needed to put them all aside to kind of get my mental health back, really. It was all just too much. How do I do this? How do I cope with all of this? And so that's why. And I think the other thing with the advertising business today is you only have to look at something like the campaign brief, or you look at award shows, and there's very little, as I'd call it, advertising. It's ideas that do this and stuff like that. And so, like, the days of pure advertising are getting less and less. And I think it's a great shame, because I see most of the ads that appear on the internet, well, there's a reason why people have ad blockers, because it's just annoying and they're bad. Whereas in the days when advertising first came along, our industry made a pact with ordinary people, which is, we're going to interrupt the things that you love. So we're going to make stuff that engages and entertains rather than annoys. And sadly, that engagement and entertain has started to dwindle.
Yeah.
That's how I kind of see it.
Yeah, look, I know what you mean. Like, it was, and obviously this is generalization, but I think the pandemic did something to creative minds everywhere where any of us who were used to posting our thoughts, we were still engaging with people in the office. And I think it created a mirror that wasn't always kind. And I think, like, I don't think I've ever drunk or partied much during inside, because there was just nothing to push against. There was no interaction. There was no output. There wasn't just me talking to me, or, I set up DOUBLESTAR at the same time, and it became the outlet to do all these things. So when I read that, I really felt it, and it was really powerful. So thank you for sharing it. But thanks for such a contribution to the community and the industry, because it really has been a big one that's been noticed.
But the interesting thing from those golden days of lockdown, which was, I think we all learnt to kind of like be at one with ourselves, to be quiet, kind of do nothing for a while. But one of the things that was really good for Lee and I was after our Ozpost thing happened, and like he and I used to live around the corner from each other, and suddenly that around the corner was a little bit more than 5 kilometers, which under Dan Andrews' rules meant that we couldn't catch up in person, and so we were unable to do that, and so we switched from Skype to this new thing we'd heard about called Zoom. And then we got an intro from someone to these guys up in Sydney from Rebel Sport, who'd started this new brand, and they were looking for a small kind of branding agency to develop the branding of that. And so we met these guys, had a chemistry session over Zoom, and through that, won that business, did all that work, launched it all, and never actually met them until after the whole thing was finished and we were allowed to leave Victoria. And so when I made them, then for a period, Lee's family had to go back to Sydney, and then I moved up here to the Dandenongs. And so we don't see each other in person like we used to. We're having lunch on Friday. We try and get a lunch in like on the last Friday of most months so that we stay in contact. But most of our work that we do together is done over Zoom. And so COVID has taught us how to do that. We felt we always had to be sitting together and knocking ideas around. Whereas now it's he'll have some, he'll do some stuff and I'll do some stuff. We'll kind of flick him over the email and backwards and forwards, and then get together and talk about it and then build from there. And so all of the work that we've done has been done with each other remotely. And so that comes almost full circle to what I was talking about with that building those relationships of trust. You can't do that over Zoom if you don't have that relationship to begin with.
Absolutely not. Stan, thank you so much for sharing so much wisdom. Like, honestly, you've given me so much to think about. You've given me things to think about with conversations I've got to go and have today, let alone as these continue.
Love to do that. All right, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Agency Land, a Survivors podcast, is hosted and produced by me, Jai Smith, founder and head of creative and strategy at DOUBLESTAR Co. Our intro track, Crash and Burn, featuring North Lanes by Phase One, used with the kindest of permissions from Fat Cat Music. Special thanks to Carla and Jarra for the art, design, and motion. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcast, leave us a review, and share it with somebody navigating agency life. Until then, you're good, get better, and stop asking for things.